So today, I don't know what to call this sermon, so I just called it Things to Consider. Last year, there was a story, and it didn't just hit the news cycle in Canada. I know it was picked up by the New York Post and several other outlets, but the story that I saw was on a global news in my home city of Calgary, Alberta. And this is the splash headline was, 2-year-old may be the youngest person ever to reach Mount Everest base camp. Now, I've got a fascination with Mount Everest, not because I ever intend to climb it, but because ever since I was a child, it's been in the news as almost an unapproachable summit. And here I'm thinking the first base camp, before you get to the death zone, a 2-year-old has made it. So I read the story. I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste for what this story says. A 2-year-old Scottish toddler, now I'm Scottish by heritage mostly, well, when you've got a little Scottish heritage, it takes over the whole thing. So I'm thinking a Scottish toddler, there you go. He's believed to be the youngest person ever to reach the Mount Everest base camp. Carter Dellis, that's a good Scottish name. Carter Dellis climbed, quote unquote, to the South Base Camp in Nepal on his father Ross's back alongside his mother Jade, multiple UK outlets report. The trek brought them 17,590 feet. For those of you like me that think metric, that's 5,364 meters above sea level. A dizzying hike that can cause altitude sickness even in the most experienced climbers. Ross, a former sales manager, said that his son coped with the adverse conditions better than he and his wife. He said, "We both got slight altitude sickness, but he was absolutely fine," Ross was quoted by the Scotsman newspaper. The family of 3 made the trek, and he says, of course, no one can scale a mountain without some training, and Carter is no exception. The hardy little toddler has been regularly practicing breathing techniques with his parents, and the whole family also does ice bath plunges together. But surprisingly, the potentially record-setting hike was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Quote, Dad says, "We basically did it on a whim. Within 24 hours of touching down in Kathmandu, we started the trek." Ross and Jade did the journey in normal running shoes with Carter strapped to Ross's back. 2-year-old may be the youngest person ever to reach Mount Everest base camp. He hiked up there. So I read the story. What was my first thought? He didn't do it alone. No 2-year-old wakes up in the morning and thinks, you know what I want to do with my day? I don't want to eat Fruit Loops. I don't want to watch cartoons. I want to take an ice bath challenge. Nobody does that. No 2-year-old says, you know what, now I'm in Kathmandu. I don't want to taste the candy in Kathmandu. I want to hike Mount Everest. No, nobody does that on their own. So I would say my first thought is, how did he get there? With somebody else. He didn't get there on his own. I think about the vision of our school, training God-called men and women to be spiritual leaders in tough places. I think about the trek that we're on. I'm thinking about the base camps that we reach and the altitudes that our students are going to be called to hike to. I think about our culture and yours. I think about the contemporary world events that we're showered with every single day. I think about the personal weights that we climb, weights that we bear, even as we walked in here this morning, and we're all climbing together. And I want to say, as we get into this, things to consider, we're all in this together. We are not in this life alone. So, having said that, the 3 proverbs that were read so wonderfully by these children earlier, let's unpack those. What would be the first thing that I would ask you to consider? I'd ask you to consider your countenance. Let's read again Proverbs chapter 15, verse 30. Bright eyes cheer the heart. Good news strengthens the bones. Let me take an aside. You know, Jesus said we're supposed to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. You're aware of that. Sometimes you might be tempted to say, well, what does that look like? It's helpful for me to think, you know what? A lot of the Proverbs have to do with telling us what that looks like. What does it look like to love God with all our mind? Lots of Proverbs about our thought life, our heart. What does it look like to love God with all our strength? There's a lot of Proverbs dealing with the slothful, foolish person or the hardworking, righteous person. This is talking about how do we love God with our being, like our countenance. Bright eyes cheer the heart. Good news strengthens the bone. What on earth does this have to do with climbing together? The New Living Translation says a cheerful look brings joy to the heart. Good news makes for good health. Countenance. It's a person's facial expression. It's the first thing you notice when you're walking toward a person. There's an English idiom, and it's when somebody's walking toward, well, I should say, it's an idiom where we're from. Maybe it is here. But when somebody's walking towards you and they've got this huge smile on their face, their countenance is radiant, what we say is, you're beaming. Are you familiar with that? You're beaming. You look at this person, young or old, and there's something about them that's just, literally, it's like somebody turned a light on and they're glowing as they walk towards you. Wouldn't it be wonderful to walk into a church meeting like you did today and meet people who are beaming? How would that change your day? Can I just tell you, I'll confess, this is my third time with you. Nobody has, to date, and don't break the trend after service, but to date, nobody has ever said anything negative to me. So many of you have found positive things to say. That's a great character trait for a church. My dad was that way. When I think of somebody whose countenance brought joy, somebody who was beaming, as a young boy, I would watch my dad. Now, my dad spent his entire career in the public school system. Most of my life growing up, he was a deacon in our church, and so I was raised as a deacon's kid. But my dad, I noticed it as a child, but when I was a teenager, it really became obvious to me that when my dad would enter a room, you could just watch him move magically through this room, and in his wake, people were laughing, smiling. After he left the room, there was a notable uplift. And as a teenager, I remember, especially as a later teenager, watching him thinking, how does he do it? He wasn't flattering people. He would just move through the room and somehow find something to say to somebody that would lift their spirit. He would do it at church. He would do it in the workplace. When I think of countenance, I think of Dad. What message does your countenance, your look, convey to others? The proverb uses the term good news. I would suggest to you that there is a thin line separating emotional health from physical health. I can tell you, even in recent days, that when the weight of stress is bearing down on you, what are the physical symptoms that you start to exhibit? My wife would say, Rob, what's wrong? What was the tell? That I'm sitting there. Emotional bleeds over into physical. Good news brings good health. It invigorates us. When I'm feeding constantly on social media or regular news outlets, can I just tell you my observation is there's very little good news. I better go somewhere else to get that. Now, sometimes they do try, especially during COVID, I noticed news stations trying to say, good news report. Like, there's some good news out there, guys, but mostly it's bad. Could we just say as a church family, we're not going to do that? When you come in here, we're going to acknowledge that there are troubling things happening in the world around us, but in here it's good news. Yeah, if you want your spirit to be picked up, just come meet with God's people. If you want to leave here thinking that I can live another week in victory, just come meet with God's people. Could that be true of a church like this one? I believe it should and can. The Amplified Bible says, the light of the eyes rejoices the heart of others, and good news puts fat on the bone. Now, you look at me and you think, you've heard a lot of good news lately. Fair enough, fair enough. What's it getting at? It's getting at when you bring a positive report, you say good things to each other, you just feel healthier when you leave. Here we stand in July 2025. Days are short. The news seems bleak. I want to suggest we must speak courage to each other. We just must. We must say to each other, take heart. Our countenance is one of the things we need to consider as we're hiking together, but it's one of the last things we think about. So what does your countenance, what is it doing here in the church as people encounter you? Do they leave uplifted, or would you say they would leave deflated? Some people think their spiritual gift is to tear each other down. I would suggest that is not a spiritual gift. Encouragement is. Good news is. What are you doing so that everybody who crosses your path, like I observed with my own father, everybody who crosses your path leaves saying, I actually am taking hope. Proverbs 21:31. I'm just going to call this your disposition. A horse is prepared for the day of battle, but victory comes from the Lord. The Message, Eugene Peterson interprets the verse this way: do your best, prepare for the worst, then trust God to bring victory. That's a good paraphrase, isn't it? Do your best, prepare for the worst, trust God to bring victory. It reminds me of Psalm 20, verse 7. Some boast in chariots and some in horses, but we will boast in the name of the Lord our God. Planning is important. Diligence is proper. Preparation is normal. But victory will not come through my efforts, nor my great and awesome plans. It will come through God's goodness and love alone. I said 2 weeks ago, we don't plan for success, we pray for success. And then we plan accordingly. What's the difference? Well, when I plan for success, what I often am doing, maybe exclusively doing, is making sure that everything is moving on to my agenda. Because why? Because my agenda is what will bring success. When I pray for success, everything is now suddenly moving onto God's agenda. And I make whatever adjustment, the planning looks like me making whatever adjustments are necessary to get with God on his agenda. There's a difference. I can remember as a pastor, this was in a difficult season of our church's life. We were making some weighty decisions. You know, growing pains are better than dying pains, but they're still pains, and these were some growing pains, and people weren't necessarily seeing eye to eye. And we had our business meeting in the evening, and typically I had become spoiled because our business meetings were wonderful affairs, usually, like they really were, but this wasn't one of those. And I'm sitting at the front of the church, and they're about to say, Rob, why don't you come and tell us what you're thinking? And I got to be honest with you guys, what was really on my heart, I never told our church this, but what was really on my heart, I thought there are 1,000 churches across North America having this same meeting that we're having right now, and it's amounting to nothing. Why? Because it felt to me in that moment that all we were talking about was our plans. No, there's a difference, and that's what I actually spoke to the church about. Let's just pause and say, what would it look like for us to be in pursuit of God's plans? Not Rob's plans, certainly not anybody else's in the churches, but God's plans. And then to make whatever adjustments are necessary to join him on those There's no success without God. Let me put it another way. People don't need more Rob. They need more Jesus. People in your community don't need more of you. Can I just be real? People don't need more Rob behind the wheel. They need Jesus to be in control of me when I'm behind the wheel. The inner Rob wants out so bad. But see, when Jesus is in control, then we can share the gospel freely. But if Rob's in control, sometimes I got to be honest with you, I'm not able to share the gospel after they've just had a good taste of me. My disposition is important. Who gives us the victory? Matthew Henry, writing, almost 400 years ago, said, "Be the cause ever so good, and the patrons of it ever so strong and wise and faithful, and the means of carrying it on and gaining the point ever so probable, still they must acknowledge God and take him along with them." I want to tell you a story about Annie Johnson Flint. She was born 100 years before I was. She was born in 1866. Let me tell you something about her life. She was born to humble parents. She was born Christmas Eve, 1866, in the small town of Vineland, New Jersey. Eldon and Jean Johnson, if you know the Johnson family, those were her parents. Not long after, about 3 years later, in giving birth to her younger sister, her mom tragically died during childbirth. Her dad already had an incurable disease. And so he willed, is how it's phrased, his children to the Flint family, where she picks up the name we know her by. These family were part of a humble Baptist church, and they had her in that church from the time that she was quite a young girl. At 8 years old, as Baptist churches often used to do, they'd have revival services, and in a revival service, Annie gave her life to Christ. Her life began to develop. She was known for her cheerful disposition, her countenance. She graduated from secondary school and then moved into teacher's college and off into teaching after a year in teacher's college. And in her second year, some things began to manifest in her life, and it became obvious that she had arthritis that became a debilitating condition in her. And in her second year, she had to quit teaching. And then the next 3-4 years after that was an increasingly painful, difficult battle as her condition worsened and worsened and worsened and worsened. Then, in short order, within months of each other, both her adoptive parents passed. Twice orphaned now. She and her sister are alone. They don't have much resource. And she began to write, as best as her crippled hand could do, she began to write some verses down to encourage herself. And others found those verses and actually became quite attracted to what she was writing and the spirit in which she was writing. When you're thinking about the context and the backdrop of it all, it's amazing to me. And then some of these verses got compiled into collections, and then ultimately some of them were pulled out of that collection. Music was put to them, and we're singing them still today. My favorite of her songs is "He Giveth More Grace." Can you listen to what this woman says? Now you think about it. Who does she believe is giving her the victory? He giveth more grace when the burdens grow greater. He sendeth more strength when the labors increase. To added afflictions, he addeth his mercy. To multiplied trials, he has multiplied peace. When we've exhausted our store of endurance, when our strength has failed ere the day is half done, when we reach the end of our hoarded resources, our Father's full giving is only begun. Fear not that thy need exceed his provision. Our God ever yearns his resources to share. Lean hard on the arm everlasting, availing. The Father both thee and thy load will upbear. His love has no limit. His grace has no measure. His power no boundary known unto men. For out of his infinite riches in Jesus, he giveth and giveth and giveth again. Who gives us the victory? God alone. And I'm invited to join the winner's side. I ready my horse not because I think that by readying my horse, I'm going to be assured of a battle, but I ready my horse because when I'm following the one who is going to give me victory, I've got to be ready to ride. I don't ready my horse for victory because I think somehow my horse, my saddle will give me the win. I ready my horse because I know the win is coming and I better be ready to follow the leader. The victories do not belong to us, but Jesus does. Last proverb is Proverbs 27:17. So your countenance, your disposition. Proverbs 27:17, one of my favorites actually. Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. This one I would just say your effect on other people, your effect. The Amplified Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens and influences another through discussion. We'll have to acknowledge that mundane stresses and responsibilities, they have a dulling effect on us, don't they? As a younger person, I thought I was supposed to stay sharp all the time. Like I grew up, it's not common as much anymore, but I grew up pretty much all summer long with a knife on my hip. You know, and the funny thing is, that knife will stay sharp all summer long so long as it stays in the sheath, right? I remember sharpening those at the beginning with my dad. We'd sit in the basement of our home with a flint and we would sharpen it until it was really sharp. And then you put it in your sheath and you're good to go. But here's the problem. All summer long, we're cutting marshmallow roasting sticks, hot dog roasting sticks, just cutting sticks. And come about the middle of July, it's not cutting as good as it used to. Why? Well, because we're using a knife for what it's intended to do. But in using it, it gets dull. Guys, listen, we're not supposed to stay sharp all the time like that. We're not supposed to stay sharp through lack of use. Our lives will get dulled because God's using us for His good purpose. How do we stay sharp? By rubbing up against each other. Can I confess to you, I've been around some Christians. They're not like flint for me. If you don't know, like flint is that stone you sharpen your knife on. They're not like that. They're like a file that grinds down the blade and turns my knife into a hammer. Don't be that person. When you come to church on a Sunday morning, most of us are dull. I don't mean boring. I just mean God's had us out there in His work field all week long, and we're feeling like we need to sharpen our blade. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Mundane stresses can blunt our blade. Ecclesiastes 10:10 says, if the axe is dull and one does not sharpen its edge, then one must exert more strength. However, the advantage of wisdom is that it brings success. Let me put this in the context of a church. If the axe is dull and one does not sharpen its blade, you have to use more strength. If we're not sharpening each other, it's going to take more and more and more and more effort just to carry on the normal, appropriate ministries of a local church. If we're not sharpening each other, it takes more effort. If you are, it's a joyous thing to be on mission with God. Stop and sharpen each other's edge. As our lives rub against each other, be intentional. Ask yourself, as I leave this morning, would people be sharper because they were with me? The King James Version, some of you have that with you this morning, says, iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. So I would say, God can use us in each other's lives. We speak in such a way that faith is appropriately encouraged and spirits are bolstered. I want to end by this. One day it might be asked of you, how did God accomplish what he did in your life? In this third and final time with you, I would say, let your answer include, I pray, because of the gloriously precious ClearView Baptist Church community that God surrounded me with. They cheered for me. They encouraged me. They exhorted me. They comforted me. They explored new heights with me. How did I see God do such wonderful things in and through my life? Because I lived my life together with others like you. Things to consider. Would you say that your countenance is life-giving to others? This morning, right now, has that been other people's experience of you as they walked into this place this morning? What about your disposition? Do you really think that all your planning will result in something enormous? All my planning will only get something Rob-sized, but we're all about something that is God-sized. So let's pray for success and then make whatever adjustments we need to in the wake of that. And what effect are you having on other people? In your family, in your church family, what effect are you having? Would they leave here better because they were around you this morning? I would say thank you, because every time I've been with you for 3 weeks now, I leave better. I pray that's your sense too.